The dinner rush always began the same way. The lights grew warmer, the music softened, and the sound of plates and quiet voices filled the room. It was the kind of restaurant people came to when they wanted to feel important. White tablecloths, polished glasses, menus that didn't show prices. For the people working there, it meant one thing: no mistakes were allowed. The waitress tied her apron tighter as she stepped onto the floor. She had already been on her feet for hours, but her back was straight and her face calm. She had learned long ago that no matter how tired she felt, she could never let it show. This job paid her bills. It helped her care for her mother. It gave her a small sense of stability in a life that had not always been kind. She moved between tables with practiced ease, greeting guests with a soft voice and a polite smile. Some people barely looked at her. Others nodded without really seeing her. A few were kind. She remembered those ones. She had just finished delivering drinks to a family near the window, when she noticed a woman being seated near the center of the room. The woman's heels clicked sharply against the floor as she walked, her posture stiff, her chin slightly raised. She scanned the restaurant the way someone inspects a place they already expect to be disappointed by. The hostess pulled out the chair and offered a welcoming smile. The woman didn't return it. She placed her bag on the table, as if claiming territory, then sighed loudly before even sitting down. The waitress felt it before she reached the table, a tension she had learned to recognize. Some guests carried it with them, like a storm cloud that followed wherever they went. She approached with her notepad ready. "Good evening," she said gently. "Welcome. Can I start you with something to drink?" The woman looked up slowly, eyes traveling from the waitress's face, down to her apron, then back again. Her lips pressed together in a thin line. "Sparkling water," the woman said. "Not tap. And make sure the glass is clean." "Yes, of course," the waitress replied. Her voice did not change. She wrote it down and nodded. As she turned to leave, the woman added, "And take your time. I don't want it rushed." The waitress paused for half a second, then nodded again. "I'll be right back." At the service station, she filled the glass carefully, checking it twice under the light before placing it on the tray. She had learned to double-check everything. People like that woman noticed even the smallest detail and sometimes imagined flaws where there were none. When she returned, she placed the glass gently on the table, aligning it just right. "Here you go," she said. The woman picked up the glass, held it to the light, and turned it slightly. The room seemed to quiet around them. "There's a spot," the woman said. The waitress leaned forward slightly, her eyes scanning the glass. She didn't see anything. "I'm sorry," she said. "Let me replace it for you." She reached for the glass, but the woman pulled it back. No, the woman said. "I just want you to know I see these things. Attention to detail matters in places like this." "Yes." "Ma'am," the waitress said softly. The woman took a sip, then set the glass down with a small frown. "Menus," she said, tapping her fingers on the table. "I've been waiting." The waitress handed over the menus. "Even though they had been placed there moments earlier by the hostess, I'll give you a few minutes," she said. As she walked away, she could feel eyes on her back. She focused on her breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. One table at a time, one moment at a time. A few minutes later, she returned. "Are you ready to order?" she asked. The woman didn't look up from the menu. "This place claims to be fine dining," she said, "but the menu is very limited." "I can make recommendations if you'd like," the waitress offered. The woman looked up then, her eyes sharp. "I didn't ask for recommendations," she said. "I asked why the options are so basic." The waitress felt a familiar tightening in her chest. She had heard this tone before. She had heard worse. "Our chef focuses on seasonal ingredients," she said calmly. "That's why the menu changes." "Well," the woman replied, "that's not my problem, is it?" "No, ma'am." The woman finally chose a dish, making several changes to it, each one delivered as a command rather than a request. The waitress wrote everything down carefully, repeating it back to be sure. "You'd better get it right," the woman said. "I don't have the patience for mistakes tonight." "I understand," the waitress said. "I'll make sure it's done correctly." As she walked toward the kitchen, her hands trembled slightly. She clenched them into fists for a moment, then relaxed them. She reminded herself that this was temporary. This shift would end. She would go home. This woman was just one part of a long night, but the night was only beginning when the food came out. The waitress carried the plate with care, making sure it looked perfect. She placed it in front of the woman and stepped back. The woman stared at the plate. "What is this?" she asked. "Your order," the waitress said. "Prepared as you requested." The woman poked at the food with her fork. "This looks overcooked," she said. The waitress leaned in slightly. "The chef prepared it fresh," she said. "If there's an issue, I can." "It's an issue," the woman snapped. "Do you think I don't know what I ordered?" "I can take it back," the waitress said. The woman sighed loudly and looked around, as if hoping others were listening. "Unbelievable," she said. "Everywhere I go, it's the same. Poor service. No standards." A couple at a nearby table shifted uncomfortably. Someone else glanced over, then looked away. The waitress picked up the plate and apologized again. In the kitchen, she explained the situation quietly. The chef frowned but said nothing. A new plate was prepared. When she returned with the replacement, the woman barely acknowledged her. "This had better be right," the woman said. "Yes, ma'am." As the waitress turned to leave, the woman called after her. "Wait," she stopped. "Where are you from?" the woman asked. The question hung in the air. "I'm from here," the waitress said. The woman tilted her head. "No," she said. "I mean..." Originally, the waitress felt heat rise in her face, but her voice remained steady. "I was born here," the woman replied, unconvinced. "Interesting." The waitress nodded and walked away, her steps measured, her shoulders tight. By now her heart was pounding. She hated questions like that. They always came with assumptions. They always felt like traps. She focused on another table, another order, another smile. But she could feel the woman's presence like a weight pulling her back. Minutes later, she returned to check on the table. She asked politely, "How is everything now?" The woman swallowed her bite slowly. "It's acceptable," she said. "But your attitude could use work." "My attitude?" the waitress asked before she could stop herself. She caught it immediately and lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry if I came across the wrong way." "You did," the woman said. "You need to learn how to speak to customers, especially in places like this." "I understand," the waitress said quietly. The woman leaned back in her chair. "People should know their place," she added. The words hit. Harder than any raised voice, the waitress felt her throat tighten. For a moment, she thought she might cry, but she didn't. She swallowed and nodded. "Yes, ma'am," she said. As she walked away, her eyes burned. She ducked into the service hallway and took a deep breath, pressing her palm against the cool wall. She counted silently until the shaking passed. She had promised herself she wouldn't let anyone break her. Not here. Not again. She straightened her apron, lifted her chin, and returned to the dining room. The woman was still there, still watching, still waiting, and the night was far from over. The restaurant had quieted slightly after the initial rush, but the tension at one particular table was still thick enough to feel from across the room. The waitress moved through the aisles carefully, taking orders, clearing plates, and smiling at guests who were polite and calm. She tried to push the woman from her mind, but it was difficult. The way she had spoken, the way she had looked at her, it was more than rudeness. It was the kind of cruelty that seemed deliberate. The woman leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs and tapping her fingers against the table. Every so often she glanced at the waitress, watching her as if she were a performer under strict scrutiny. She did not speak to her companion, if she even had one. This was a solo performance, and the waitress was the unwilling participant. The waitress approached again with a small smile, holding the woman's wine glass. "Would you like another glass?" she asked politely. The woman's eyes narrowed. "It's not about the glass," she said. "It's about you. Your service is lacking." The words were calm but sharp. The waitress nodded slowly. "I'm sorry if I didn't meet your expectations," she said. "I'll make sure to improve," the woman scoffed. "Improve? You don't know the meaning of the word." Some people are just incapable of professionalism. The waitress's hands clenched slightly around the tray she was holding. She had learned to keep her composure, but this time it was harder. She felt the eyes of the nearby tables, some curious, some uncomfortable. No one spoke, but she could sense the tension spreading. People could feel when someone was being treated unfairly, even if they did not understand why. She set the glass down and took the woman's plate from earlier, hoping to replace it again. "I can have the chef prepare something else for you," she said. The woman waved her hand dismissively. "No, it's fine. Clearly the food is fine. The problem isn't the food. It's you. You are the problem." The waitress nodded, keeping her voice soft. "I understand. I will do better." The woman leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a low, almost conspiratorial tone. "You even know what it means to serve someone properly, to show respect to those who deserve it." The words stung. The waitress kept her eyes on the woman, trying not to let her reaction show. She had heard comments like this before, but there was something different in the way this woman spoke. It was not just criticism, it was judgment. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly. The woman straightened again and gestured vaguely toward the table. "I expect people to understand their place. Don't look at me like that. I can see right through you." The waitress's stomach tightened. She had learned to hold her ground, without fighting, to answer with politeness, even when her pride screamed otherwise. But inside, a storm was brewing. She had spent years working in places like this, learning to navigate disrespect without letting it break her. Yet this was different. This woman's cruelty was personal as the waitress moved away to attend to another table. She felt the woman's eyes following her. Every movement, every step, was being watched. She focused on her work, setting plates and refilling drinks. But the weight of the woman's gaze never left her. When she returned to the table, the woman's face was twisted in a look of mild irritation. "Do you even know how to carry yourself?" she asked. A person's appearance and attitude mattered just as much as their work. "People notice everything, especially me." The waitress's lips pressed together. She wanted to respond, to say that her work spoke for itself. But she did not. She had learned that arguing would not help. Instead, she knelt slightly, keeping her voice soft. "I apologize if I've given the wrong impression. I will do my best." The woman leaned back, smirking slightly. "You apologize too easily. That shows weakness. Do you know what I would do in your place?" The waitress shook her head, keeping her composure. "You know, ma'am, I would not tolerate this," the woman said, her voice rising just enough to make others at nearby tables look over. "I would make sure everyone knows I am the one in charge. Some people need to be reminded of their position." The waitress's hand shook slightly, but she did not show it. She had learned to carry burdens quietly, to let words slide off like water. But the humiliation was growing. She could feel her chest tightening, her throat dry. Every word from this woman chipped away at her patience. She moved back to the service station, taking a deep breath. Her coworker gave her a brief look of sympathy, but said nothing. They had all seen this woman before. She was known in certain circles for her temper and her cruel attitude toward staff. But knowing it didn't make it easier to endure, when the waitress returned with a fresh plate for the woman, she placed it carefully on the table. "Here you are, ma'am, prepared as requested." The woman picked up the plate, her expression scrutinizing every angle. "Humph," she said, "it looks tolerable. But I can see you didn't pay attention to the details. The garnish is off. Do you even care about your work?" The waitress's fingers tightened around her notepad. She had spent extra time ensuring everything was perfect. But the woman was determined to find fault. She swallowed her pride. "I do care, ma'am. I will make it right if there is an issue." The woman waved her hand dismissively. "I don't need your excuses. I need results. Some people just don't understand what it means to serve someone properly. You are one of those people." The words were like knives, cutting into her confidence. She had faced difficult customers before, but this woman's cruelty was methodical. It was designed to make her feel small, insignificant, powerless. And yet she stood there, calm on the outside, while inside, her mind raced with frustration and hurt. She walked back toward the kitchen, feeling the weight of every stare in the restaurant. Some were curious, some uncomfortable. She knew they could see the exchange, could feel the tension, but yet no one intervened. That was often the hardest part. Isolation of being the target, even in a crowded room. In the kitchen, she exhaled slowly, pressing her palms against the cool stainless steel counter. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of sizzling pans and clattering plates drown out the woman's voice. She reminded herself of why she was there. She reminded herself of her goals, of her responsibilities, of the people she was supporting. When she returned to the dining room, she tried to reset her energy. She greeted another table with a smile, answered questions, and refilled glasses. She reminded herself that this woman, with all her arrogance and cruelty, did not define her. Her work, her dedication, her patience, that was who she was. But the woman was relentless. Every time the waitress approached her table, a new criticism awaited. The seating arrangement was wrong. The temperature of the food was too warm, the cutlery was not aligned, it was endless. And with each word, the woman's voice grew louder, more condescending, more humiliating. Other diners began to notice. Some glanced around uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene or ignore what was happening. The restaurant's atmosphere grew tense. Waitstaff exchanged nervous glances. The manager, busy with other responsibilities, did not appear. The waitress felt the full weight of the woman's scrutiny, and yet she refused to falter. She knelt slightly at the table, her voice steady, soft but firm. "I apologize, ma'am. I will correct it immediately." The woman leaned back, smirking, clearly enjoying the control she held. "Apologies are not enough," she said. "You must learn respect, professionalism, and the importance of paying attention to detail. Some people never do." The waitress nodded. Inside, she felt anger, hurt, and exhaustion swirl together. She wanted to scream, to tell the woman she was wrong, to demand that she'd stop, but she didn't. She had learned that survival sometimes meant patience, even in the face of cruelty. She stepped away from the table and went to the corner of the room where she could take a brief moment to breathe. She pressed her hands against her forehead, closing her eyes. She repeated silently, "This will end. This will end." Minutes passed. She returned to the woman's table with renewed focus. She refilled the glass, adjusted the silverware, and smiled politely. "Is everything now to your satisfaction?" she asked. The woman stared at her, eyes sharp, lips curling into a thin smile. "For now," she said, "but you must understand, your attitude is more important than anything else. People notice. I notice. Most people fail to live up to expectations." The waitress nodded again. Her throat was tight, her hands slightly trembling, but she held her posture. She would finish this shift. She would not allow this woman to break her. Not here. Not now. She moved away from the table, her steps measured, her mind focused on each task ahead. The night was far from over, and she knew that this woman's cruelty would continue. But she also knew something else. She knew that strength was quiet, patience was powerful, and dignity was maintained not by shouting, but by standing firm in the face of adversity. The restaurant hummed around her, the low buzz of conversations and clinking glasses filling the space, and somewhere deep in her chest, a quiet determination grew. She would survive this. She would finish the night. And no one, not even this woman, would take away her pride. The night was slipping by slowly, the restaurant still humming with activity, but for the waitress, every minute felt heavy. The woman at the center table had not eased her sharp gaze. She continued to watch the waitress as though every movement might betray some flaw, and every slight misstep could be punished with another cutting remark. The waitress moved carefully, almost mechanically, trying to anticipate every need, every command, every unspoken expectation. As she refilled drinks at a nearby table, she felt a subtle shift in the air behind her, presence, quiet but firm, that made her pause for just a moment. She turned slightly, scanning the dining room, but everything seemed normal. The guests were quietly eating, talking in soft tones, and the other staff moved about their tasks. Still, the feeling lingered, prickling her skin.
Ow.
It was as if someone had been observing the entire scene from a distance. Waiting for the right moment, She shook her head and returned to the table, carrying another plate carefully, ensuring it was aligned perfectly. The woman immediately noticed. HMPH, she said, tapping her finger lightly on the edge of the plate. Finally, some attention to detail. But do you understand why it took so long? I'm sorry, ma'am, the waitress said softly. I wanted to make sure it was perfect for you. The woman's eyes narrowed. Excuses. That's all I hear from you.
Apologize. Some apologize.
Some people apologize because they are weak. Some because they are afraid. The waitress kept her calm, keeping her voice even. I am not afraid. I just want to do my job correctly, the woman said, leaning forward slightly. This isn't a job. It's a responsibility. And responsibility requires more than mere effort. It requires respect. Do you know what that means? Yes, ma'am, the waitress replied. The woman smirked, clearly enjoying the discomfort she was creating. But this time, something was different. She did not notice a man quietly standing near the entrance of the restaurant, observing the entire exchange. He was not a regular guest. He was quiet, unassuming, dressed simply, and yet there was a calm authority in the way he watched. He did not intervene, not yet, but his eyes followed every movement, every word, every flicker of tension. The waitress returned to the service station to catch her breath, pressing her hands against the cool counter. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the sounds around her. Plates clinking, silverware sliding against glasses, soft murmurs of other diners. Her heart was still pounding from the earlier interactions. But she reminded herself of something important. She had control over her own reactions, even if she couldn't control the woman's behavior. When she walked back to the table, she carried a fresh glass of water, placing it carefully in front of the woman. Here you are, ma'am, she said politely. The woman picked up the glass, turning it in her hand and inspecting it. Much better, she said slowly, almost begrudgingly. But tell me, how do you even survive in this line of work with such little understanding of people? You must know how weak and careless most of your kind are, don't you? The words hit like stones. The waitress's chest tightened. She had heard similar comments before, but never so sharply aimed, so deliberate, so cruel. She looked at the woman for a moment, meeting her gaze with calm eyes. I do my best, she said quietly. The woman's lips curled in a thin, mocking smile. Your best is not enough. You need guidance. Someone to show you the standards you are failing to meet. At that exact moment, the man near the entrance stepped forward. He had watched everything quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment. Now, he moved with a steady, deliberate calm, weaving through the tables until he stopped just behind the woman. The waitress did not notice him immediately. She was focused on her next task, but the woman did. She felt the shift in the air, the subtle weight of someone standing close. She glanced over her shoulder and froze. The man was calm, quiet, but unmistakably present. There was a sense of authority about him that made the woman shift slightly in her chair. She had expected the restaurant to be her domain for the evening, a place where she could display her power over the staff. But now, that control felt uncertain, almost fragile. Excuse me, he said, his voice even calm, but firm. I couldn't help overhearing your conversation. The woman's face tightened. And who are you? She demanded. I'm someone who cares about this restaurant and its staff, he said simply. I also care about fairness and respect. I've been observing the way you've treated our waitress tonight. The woman's lips pressed together, a flash of anger crossing her face. I have every right to speak as I wish. I am a customer. She is here to serve me. That is the way it works. The man's gaze remained steady. Being a customer does not give anyone the right to humiliate or degrade others. You have crossed the line several times tonight. The waitress felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had endured hours of cruelty, silent tension, and relentless criticism. Now, someone had finally stepped in, not angrily, not aggressively, but calmly and firmly. She felt a flicker of hope, of support. That gave her the strength to stand a little taller, breathe a little easier. The woman's face turned red, and for the first time, she seemed unsure. She had not expected resistance. She had not expected anyone to challenge her. She had assumed her authority in this space was absolute, but now that assumption was crumbling. "You," the woman began. But the man held up a hand. "Let's not argue," he said. "You are entitled to your opinion, but you are not entitled to treat someone this way, especially someone who is doing their job with dignity and patience despite your behavior." The woman looked around, realizing that the eyes of the room were now on her. Other diners had noticed the exchange, their quiet attention making the tension more palpable. She shifted in her seat, suddenly self-conscious. The waitress took a deep breath. For the first time that night, she felt seen, not for her mistakes, not for the woman's harsh judgments, but for her calm, her effort, her dignity under pressure. She met the man's gaze and nodded slightly. A silent acknowledgement of support. The woman, sensing the shift in power, tried to regain control. "Who are you to lecture me?" she demanded. "I am someone who knows the value of respect," he replied. "And I will not allow you to treat anyone in this restaurant with cruelty." The woman's hands gripped the edge of the table. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She realized that no one was backing her up. The diners were watching. The staff was watching. And the man standing calmly behind her was not going to let her continue. The waitress, standing quietly a few steps away, felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had endured so much tonight, and yet she had not broken. Now someone else had entered the scene, someone who understood that cruelty could not go unchecked. The woman's voice, which had been sharp and commanding, faltered. She tried to speak, tried to regain her composure, but the words stumbled. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that her behavior was being judged not by staff, not by a manager, but by someone with authority and presence, someone who could see past her arrogance. The man's presence alone shifted the room. His calm confidence was enough to change the dynamic, to make the woman realize that her power was not absolute. The waitress could feel the tension in her shoulders ease slightly, her heart rate slowing as hope returned. The woman finally spoke, her voice quieter now, lacking its earlier venom. I did not realize." "You realize now," the man said gently, "and that is enough for tonight." The woman looked down at the table, avoiding eye contact. She had expected to control the situation, to humiliate the waitress, to prove superiority. But now, all of that had evaporated. She was confronted with a presence she could not intimidate, and the weight of her own actions became undeniable. The waitress, standing quietly, felt a surge of gratitude. She did not speak, did not move forward, but simply remained present, acknowledging silently that someone had her back. She had not been alone in this moment, even if she had felt isolated for hours. The man finally turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "You handled this well," he said softly. "Your patience, your professionalism, your comment has not gone unnoticed. You have done exactly what is needed in situations like this." The waitress nodded, her chest swelling slightly with pride. She had endured cruelty, criticism, and humiliation. She had kept her composure when it seemed impossible. And now, finally, someone recognized it. The woman, realizing she was no longer in control, slumped slightly in her chair. She had expected to dominate the room, to assert authority over the staff, but instead, she was confronted with a quiet, undeniable truth. Cruelty could be met with dignity, patience could withstand harshness, and support could appear when least expected. The waitress returned to her tasks, but her movements felt lighter now. She had survived the storm. She had endured, and she had been seen. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that things were about to change, not just for this night, but for every challenge she would face in the future. The restaurant continued to hum with activity, the night moving forward. But in that small space, at that one table, a quiet shift had occurred. The woman's arrogance had met its match. The waitress's dignity had been acknowledged. And someone had stepped forward when it mattered most, changing the course of the evening in ways no one could have predicted. The woman at the table shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her posture rigid, her hands gripping the edges of the table. The man standing behind her, calm and steady, had completely changed the balance in the room. She had thought she could intimidate the waitress, show dominance, and leave with a sense of victory. But now, the situation felt different. She was no longer in control. The diners nearby had noticed the exchange. Some whispered quietly, casting glances at the woman. And even the staff were watching, holding their breath to see what would happen next. The woman's face showed a flicker of uncertainty, a rare crack in her otherwise sharp mask of confidence. She had expected compliance, fear, and servitude, but instead, she faced calm authority and silent judgment. "You need to understand," the man said gently but firmly, "that your behavior is not acceptable. It has caused unnecessary distress. It has humiliated someone who has done nothing to deserve it." The woman's mouth opened, then closed. She looked around the room as if searching for someone to side with her, someone to validate her power, but there was no one. Everyone in the room, from other diners to staff, had seen what was happening. She could feel the eyes on her, the quiet judgment. For the first time, she felt exposed. I didn't mean to," she started, but her words stumbled. She had no real excuse, no explanation that would make sense. Her pride had led her into this situation, and now, pride alone could not save her. "You meant to," the man said softly, "to assert dominance, to belittle someone you saw as weaker. But the truth is you were wrong. And now, you must face that truth." The woman's fingers twitched on the table. She was used to control, used to being obeyed, used to having her way. But here, in this moment, she could not control anything. She had misjudged the room, misjudged the people around her, misjudged the waitress. The waitress, standing quietly a few feet away, watched silently. She felt a strange mix of relief, pride, and disbelief. After hours of being criticized, humiliated, and belittled, someone had finally intervened. Someone had recognized her professionalism and dignity under pressure. She had endured, and now she was being validated, not by empty words, but by action. The woman finally looked directly at the man, her face flushed. "And who are you exactly to lecture me about this?" she demanded. "I am someone who cares about fairness," he replied calmly. "Someone who believes that no one deserves to be humiliated, especially for doing their job. And I am someone who recognizes when patience, effort, and dignity are displayed under pressure."
Oh.
The woman's eyes narrowed. She had thought she could intimidate anyone, but this man was different. He did not shout, did not insult, did not try to dominate. He simply spoke the truth, calmly and firmly. And it had power beyond anything she had encountered that night. "You will leave this restaurant," he said, "and you will remember this moment. Not as a moment of victory, but as a moment of reflection. Your behavior was unacceptable, and it will not be tolerated here or anywhere else." And the woman's jaw tightened. She wanted to argue, to protest, to reclaim her power, but the words stuck in her throat. She realized that no amount of talking, no amount of excuses, could undo what had already been seen. She had been exposed. Her cruelty had been witnessed, and it was no longer hidden behind her wealth, her status, or her arrogance. The diners watched silently, sensing the shift. The woman's confidence had evaporated, replaced by discomfort and a growing sense of shame. She had expected applause for her assertiveness, for her ability to command attention. Instead, she was met with calm authority, dignity, and a quiet strength she could not overcome. The waitress, feeling the tension in the room, took a deep breath. She had spent hours enduring criticism and humiliation, and now she felt the weight of validation settle over her. She had not faltered, had not reacted with anger, had not allowed the woman's cruelty to define her. And now, someone else had recognized it. The man spoke again, softly, but with a firm finality. "This is not about punishment. It is about understanding. You have the chance to leave here with a sense of what is right and what is wrong. You have the chance to reflect, to learn, and to change." The woman's eyes flicked around the room. She could feel the judgment of the diners, the staff, and the silent support of the waitress. For the first time that night, she felt small, exposed, and vulnerable. Her carefully constructed facade of superiority and control had crumbled in a single moment, placed by a quiet truth she could not ignore. She finally spoke, her voice low and hesitant. "Die." "I understand," she said, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. The man nodded once, his expression calm but resolute. "Good. Remember this feeling. Let it guide you in the future. Let it remind you that cruelty has consequences and dignity deserves recognition." The woman sat in silence for a few moments, her hands folded tightly on the table. She had expected dominance, control, and power. Instead, she had been confronted with truth, patience, and quiet authority. She realized that the night had not gone as she planned, and that her actions had left her exposed, humbled, and deeply aware of her own flaws. The waitress, still standing a few feet away, felt a mixture of relief and pride. She had endured hours of cruelty and criticism, but she had maintained her dignity and professionalism. Now she was being seen not for her mistakes, but for her strength, her patience, and her composure under pressure. The diners, sensing the conclusion of the moment, returned to their meals, some glancing back occasionally with quiet approval. The staff, who had watched nervously from the sidelines, relaxed slightly, their respect for the waitress and the man growing with every passing second. The woman finally stood up. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and cautious. She gathered her belongings, avoiding eye contact with the waitress, the man, and the diners. She had expected victory, but now she left with a sense of reflection, her arrogance replaced by a quiet awareness of her mistakes. As she reached the exit, the man spoke one last time. "Learn from this. Treat people with respect, even when you think you have power over them. You will find that kindness and dignity carry more weight than cruelty and arrogance." The woman paused for a moment, then continued out the door, her steps heavy and her posture tense. She had lost the control she had assumed, and the night had reminded her that her actions had consequences. She would not forget this lesson. The restaurant exhaled a quiet sigh of relief. The tension that had filled the room began to dissipate. Guests returned to their conversations, laughter and soft voices filling the space once more. The staff resumed their tasks with a renewed sense of purpose, and the waitress finally allowed herself a small moment to breathe deeply. She felt a wave of emotions relief, pride, gratitude, and a quiet sense of empowerment. She had faced cruelty, endured it, and emerged with her dignity intact. She had been tested, and she had passed, and she had been supported when it mattered most, reminded that she was not alone. The man, still standing quietly near the center of the room, gave a small nod to the waitress. She returned it with a soft smile, a silent acknowledgement of support and understanding. The night was far from over, but this moment had changed everything. For the woman who had tried to humiliate her, it was a night of reflection and learning. For the waitress, it was a night of recognition, validation, and quiet triumph. And for everyone who had witnessed it, it was a reminder that dignity, patience, and courage in the face of cruelty could change the course of a single night, perhaps even the course of a life. The waitress returned to her tasks with renewed energy. Every step felt lighter, every movement more assured. She knew that challenges would come again, that there would be more difficult guests and more moments of tension. But now she carried with her a sense of strength, a knowledge that she could endure, a quiet confidence that came from having her dignity recognized and respected. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that this night, this moment, had marked a turning point. A moment when cruelty was met with calm authority, when patience triumphed over arrogance, and when a single act of recognition could transform fear into empowerment. The restaurant continued its rhythm. It's a clinking of glasses, the soft hum of conversation, the movement of staff and diners. But within that rhythm, a quiet truth had emerged. Respect and dignity could not be taken lightly. Cruelty could be challenged, and strength, patience, and composure could shine even in the darkest moments. For the waitress, this night would remain in her memory forever, not as a night of humiliation, but as a night of triumph, validation, and the quiet power of human dignity. The restaurant had finally settled into a quiet rhythm. The night had been long, filled with tension and challenges, but the air now felt lighter, almost peaceful. The woman who had caused so much distress earlier had left, her presence replaced by a sense of relief and calm. Staff moved about their tasks with quiet efficiency, and guests talked softly. Unaware of the storm that had passed just hours before, the waitress stood for a moment near the service station, taking in the scene. Her heart still thumped from the earlier confrontation. But there was a new energy within her, a mix of pride, relief, and a growing sense of empowerment. She had endured cruelty, humiliation, and relentless criticism, and she had remained calm, composed, and professional. And she had been seen, supported, and validated in a way that she had never experienced before. She allowed herself a small smile, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. The long hours on her feet, the endless orders, and the constant scrutiny had tested her patience and her dignity. But she had passed the test. More than that, she had learned something valuable, something that went beyond the restaurant walls. She had learned that her worth was not defined by the harsh words of others, no matter how sharp or cruel. The man who had intervened earlier approached her quietly. His presence was calm yet commanding, and there was a quiet respect in his eyes as he regarded her. "You handled that well," he said softly. "I've seen many people break under pressure, but you remain steady, patient, professional, and dignified. That is rare." The waitress nodded, her voice quiet but sincere. "Thank you. It was difficult. I tried to stay calm, but I won't lie. I was nervous. I didn't want to let it affect me, but it wasn't easy." He smiled gently. "It's never easy to face cruelty. The important part is that you didn't let it define you. You showed strength, even when it felt impossible. That is what matters." The waitress felt a wave of gratitude. She had spent hours alone in her struggle, enduring insult after insult. And now someone had not only acknowledged her efforts, but also reminded her of her strength. It was a feeling she had rarely experienced. A validation that filled her with a quiet confidence. She had almost forgotten she possessed as she returned to the dining floor. She noticed the staff giving her subtle nods of respect. They had witnessed the entire situation. And though none of them had spoken up while it was happening, their quiet recognition was meaningful. They understood the courage it had taken to maintain composure under such relentless pressure. The waitress felt a small but powerful sense of community, knowing she was not alone in her experience and that her dignity had earned quiet admiration. She moved through the restaurant with renewed energy, serving guests with a calm and confident presence. Orders were taken carefully. Dishes were delivered with precision. And her smile now carried a quiet strength that had been absent earlier. The guests responded naturally, sensing her calm, professional demeanor, and some even complimented her service. Each compliment felt like a small victory, reinforcing the lesson she had learned through the ordeal to patience. Composure and dedication are recognized, even when the recognition is delayed. Later, as the evening began to wind down, the waitress found a quiet moment near the kitchen. She took a deep breath, letting herself relax fully for the first time that night. She reflected on what had happened, the woman's cruelty, the relentless criticism, the tension, and finally, the intervention that had shifted everything. She thought about the lessons she had learned, that her worth was not determined by others' judgment. That dignity could be maintained even under pressure, and that support could appear when least expected. A coworker approached her quietly, carrying a stack of menus. "You did great tonight," the coworker said softly, glancing toward the empty table where the woman had sat. "I don't know how you kept your calm, but you did. And you didn't let her ruin the night for anyone else. That takes real strength." The waitress smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said. "It was hard, but I tried to remember why I'm here. And I kept thinking, I can't let her control how I feel about myself." "I had to stay steady, no matter what." The coworker nodded, clearly impressed. "Well, you did it. And you made it through. That's something to be proud of." As the night wore on and the last few diners left, the waitress helped tidy the tables, clear the floors, and prepare the restaurant for the next day. Each task felt lighter now, less like a burden and more like a way to reclaim control of her space. She realized that the night had tested her in ways she had not anticipated, but it had also strengthened her. She had faced adversity and emerged not broken, but stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own resilience. When the restaurant finally closed for the night, the waitress stepped outside into the cool evening air. The streets were quiet, lit by soft streetlights. The world felt peaceful in contrast to the chaos of the restaurant earlier. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the night begin to lift. She had survived, and in doing so, she had learned a powerful lesson about dignity, strength, and the importance of standing firm, even when challenged, as she walked toward her home. She reflected on the moments that had defined the evening, the woman's cruelty, the relentless criticism, and the calm intervention that had changed everything. She thought about the lesson of support, how a single presence of understanding and authority could shift the balance, and how her own patience and composure had played a role in the outcome. She realized that these lessons were not just for the restaurant, but for life itself. She thought about the people she cared for, her family, her friends, and those who relied on her. She understood now, more clearly than ever, that her strength and dignity were not just for herself, but also for those who looked to her as an example. She had endured adversity with grace, and that grace had not gone unnoticed. The night had also reminded her of something important, that cruelty, no matter how sharp or deliberate, could be met with patience, dignity, and calm authority. She had seen it firsthand. The woman had believed she could dominate and humiliate, but in the end, she had been confronted with truth and consequence. The lesson was clear: strength is not always loud, and authority is not always forceful. Sometimes the quiet, steady presence of someone who understands fairness and respect is enough to change the course of a moment, or even a life. As she reached her front door, she paused for a moment, looking up at the sky. Stars dotted the night, faint but steady, much like the quiet strength she now carried within herself. She realized that the night had been more than just a shift at work. It had been a test, a lesson, and a moment of transformation. She had faced cruelty and emerged with her dignity intact. She had been recognized, supported, and validated. And she had discovered a quiet confidence that would guide her in the future. Inside her home, she removed her apron and hung it carefully. She sat down for a moment, letting herself relax fully. She thought about the evening, about the people who had witnessed it, and about the lessons she would carry forward. She felt a sense of calm and peace, knowing that she had faced a challenge that many would have crumbled under and had emerged not only intact but stronger. The woman's cruelty, the tension, the humiliation, they were all part of the night. But they no longer held power over her. Instead, they had become a reminder of her own strength, patience, and dignity. She understood now that no one could take these qualities from her. They were hers to carry, to cultivate, and to rely upon in all the moments that life would inevitably bring. And so, as the night settled fully and the world outside grew quiet, the waitress allowed herself to smile, a soft, confident smile that reflected not just relief, but empowerment. She had faced adversity, endured it, and emerged with her dignity and strength intact. She had learned that patience and composure could withstand cruelty, that support could appear when least expected, and that quiet confidence could triumph over arrogance and insult. The night had changed her, not in the way that fear or humiliation could, but in the way that understanding, resilience, and dignity always change a person. She knew that challenges would come again, that cruelty might appear in different forms. But she also knew something stronger, that she was capable of facing them, standing tall, and maintaining her integrity no matter what. The lessons of the night would stay with her forever. She had been tested, judged, and criticized, yet she had endured. She had been supported, validated, and acknowledged, and she had emerged stronger than before. And as she finally turned off the lights and prepared to rest, she carried within her a quiet power, a reminder that dignity, patience, and strength can triumph, even in the darkest moments. The evening, which had begun with tension, cruelty, and fear, ended with a sense of quiet triumph. The waitress had faced her challenge and emerged victorious in the most important ways. She had not only survived, but she had also grown, learned, and discovered the depth of her own resilience. And in that quiet victory, she understood something profound, that strength is not always loud, that patience is not always easy, and that dignity, once embraced and maintained, can illuminate even the darkest of nights.